The cigarette smoke rose in lazy spirals through the morning light, and Hauptmann Werner Kessler watched it curl toward the canvas ceiling of the briefing tent, as if even smoke could not be bothered to hurry in this war. Why should it? France had fallen in 6 weeks. Poland in 4. Norway surrendered before most of its soldiers understood they were fighting. Now only England remained, a small island nation clinging to the edge of Europe like a man hanging from a cliff by his fingernails. Werner crushed the cigarette beneath his boot and smiled. Those fingernails would slip soon enough. Around him, the pilots of Jageschwitter 51 laughed and traded stories from yesterday's mission over the channel. 22 Spitfires engaged. 11 shot down. The British had fought bravely, Werner admitted. They always did, but bravery without skill was just a faster way to die. The RAF flew in tight, rigid formations that made them predictable, easy targets for experienced hunters. They climbed when they should have dived. They turned when they should have rolled. They fought like men who had learned everything from training manuals and nothing from the sky itself. Werner had 23 kills painted on the nose of his Messerschmitt Bf 109, each small marking representing a moment when his instincts had proven faster than another pilot's reactions. He had earned those kills over Warsaw, where Polish aircraft fell like autumn leaves. He had earned them over the Meuse River, where French fighters scattered before the advancing German tide. And now he would earn more over England, because the English were no different from the others. Brave, yes. Determined, certainly. But amateurs nonetheless. Hauptmann, called Lieutenant Hans Muller, the youngest pilot in the squadron, barely 20 years old with bright eyes that had not yet learned what death looked like up close. Do you think we'll be in London by September? Werner clapped the boy on the shoulder. September? I think we'll be drinking English beer by August, Hans. The RAF cannot replace their losses fast enough. Every day, they send up fewer aircraft. Every day, we grow stronger. Mathematics will win this war, not miracles. The briefing officer entered and unrolled a map of southern England across the wooden table. Red circles marked RAF airfields. Biggin Hill, Kenley, Hornchurch, Manston, targets that would be systematically destroyed over the coming weeks. Blue lines traced the planned attack routes across the channel, protected by fighter escorts that would sweep the sky clean of any British resistance. Werner studied the map with the calm confidence of a chess player who could already see checkmate. The Luftwaffe possessed over 2,500 aircraft for the assault on Britain. The RAF had perhaps 700 fighters, many of them already damaged, many piloted by men with less than 50 hours of combat training. Reichsmarshal Göring had promised Hitler that air superiority would be achieved within 4 weeks. Werner believed it would take less. After the briefing, Werner walked across the grass airfield toward his waiting Messerschmitt, its sleek gray fuselage gleaming in the French summer sun. Ground crews had already loaded the ammunition and topped off the fuel tanks. The aircraft's Daimler-Benz engine idled with a deep, powerful rumble that Werner felt in his chest like a second heartbeat. He paused beside his wingman, Oberleutnant Friedrich Brandt, an older pilot with gray streaks in his dark hair and a quiet manner that sometimes irritated the younger men. Friedrich had flown in Spain during the Civil War, testing German aircraft against Soviet-made machines flown by Republican pilots. He rarely spoke of those days, and when he did, his voice carried a weight that Werner did not fully understand. "Something troubles you, Friedrich?" The older pilot shrugged, his eyes scanning the horizon toward the invisible coast of England. "I wonder where they keep coming from. We destroy their airfields, and yet they appear again the next day. We shoot down their fighters, and new ones replace them within a week. It is strange. Van Alaukit. They are pulling aircraft from training schools, from reserve depots. Desperate measures from a desperate nation. By the end of the month, they will have nothing left but courage, and courage alone cannot stop a bullet." Friedrich nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. "Perhaps. I have learned to respect an enemy who refuses to die when he should. Such men are dangerous." Werner climbed into his cockpit and strapped himself in, dismissing his wingman's concerns as the natural caution of age. The British were finished. They simply hadn't realized it yet. Their radar stations were primitive, their tactics outdated, their pilots inexperienced. Every advantage belonged to Germany. The engine roared to full power, and Werner taxied toward the runway, his squadron forming up behind him in perfect formation. Ahead, the sky stretched endless and blue, a highway leading directly to victory. Below, the channel sparkled like scattered diamonds, beautiful and indifferent to the men who would soon fall into its cold embrace. Werner pushed the throttle forward and lifted into the morning air, climbing toward England with the certainty of a man who had never known defeat. The war was nearly over. He was sure of it. He could not have been more wrong. The chair had been empty for 3 days now, and no one had moved it. It sat at the corner of the mess hall table where Lieutenant Erich Vogel used to sit, where he used to tell jokes about his sister's terrible cooking and dream aloud about opening a bakery after the war. Now Erich was somewhere at the bottom of the English Channel, his Messerschmitt torn apart by a Spitfire that had appeared from nowhere, diving out of the sun like an angel of death. Werner Kessler stared at that empty chair and felt something shift inside his chest, something cold and unfamiliar. 3 weeks had passed since those confident mornings when victory seemed inevitable. The summer of 1940 had grown hot and brutal, and the war over England had changed in ways Werner struggled to understand. The RAF was supposed to be broken by now. Their airfields were supposed to be craters. Their pilots were supposed to be dead or grounded, their aircraft smoking wreckage scattered across the countryside. Instead, every morning brought new Spitfires and Hurricanes rising to meet the German formations. Every mission cost more aircraft, more pilots, more of the men Werner had trained and trusted. The mathematics of victory had become the mathematics of attrition, and the numbers no longer favored Germany. "They know where we are," Friedrich Brandt said quietly, sliding into the seat beside Werner. His face looked older than it had a month ago, the lines around his eyes deeper, the gray in his hair more prominent. "Every mission, they are waiting for us. Not scattered, not surprised. Waiting." Werner pushed his untouched breakfast away. "They're radar stations. We have bombed them repeatedly, but they keep operating, or new ones appear. And even when we approach from different directions, different altitudes, they find us." Friedrich lowered his voice. "I spoke with a pilot from Jagerschwader 26. He said the British have some kind of system, a network that coordinates their fighters across the entire country. They see everything, Werner. Everything. The chain home radar system, Werner had heard it called in intelligence briefings, a string of tall metal towers along the English coast that could detect aircraft formations from over 100 kilometers away. German command had dismissed it as primitive, unreliable, easily destroyed. But the towers kept standing, and the RAF kept appearing exactly where they were needed, exactly when they were needed. Worse than the radar was the change in British tactics. The rigid formations that Werner had mocked were gone. Now RAF squadrons attacked in pairs and small groups, diving from above to scatter the German bomber formations before climbing back to altitude and attacking again. They targeted the bombers first, ignoring the fighter escorts, forcing Werner's men to break formation and chase individual aircraft across the sky. Every engagement became chaos, and chaos favored the defenders. 2 days ago, Werner had shot down a Hurricane over the Kent countryside. He watched the pilot bail out, his white parachute blooming against the green fields below. The man drifted slowly earthward, and Werner found himself circling, watching, wondering who this enemy was. A professional soldier? A volunteer? A shopkeeper or teacher who had traded his ordinary life for a cockpit and a prayer? The British pilot landed in a wheat field and immediately began gathering his parachute, already preparing to return to his squadron and fight again. Werner could have strafed him. Some pilots did, though it was technically forbidden, but instead he waggled his wings in a strange salute and turned back toward France. He did not understand why. That night, Friedrich Brandt was shot down during a raid on Kinley Airfield. His Messerschmitt took cannon fire through the engine, cowling, and burst into flames. Friedrich managed to bail out over the channel, but the cold water and the fire had taken his right arm before a German patrol boat pulled him from the sea. Werner visited him at the field hospital before the evacuation to Germany. Friedrich lay in a white bed, his face pale, his remaining hand trembling slightly as he gripped Werner's fingers. "They are not amateurs," Friedrich whispered. "They never were. We saw what we wanted to see because it was easier than seeing the truth. But the truth does not care what we believe, Werner. It simply waits for us to understand." Werner stood beside the ambulance as it carried Friedrich away, watching until the vehicle disappeared down the dusty road toward the coast. When he turned back to the airfield, the Messerschmitts lined up for the next mission looked smaller somehow, more fragile, more mortal. That evening, the briefing officer announced a massive operation plan for August 15th. 3 air fleets attacking simultaneously. Over 1,500 aircraft. The largest aerial assault in history, designed to destroy the RAF once and for all. Werner listened to the confident projections and felt nothing but the cold weight of fear settling into his bones. The war had changed, and he was only beginning to understand how much. Dawn came gray and angry on August 15th, 1940, the clouds hanging low over the French coast like a burial shroud waiting to be draped across the dead. Werner Kessler stood on the tarmac at Wissant, watching hundreds of aircraft taxi into position, their engines filling the air with a sound like rolling thunder. Heinkel He-111 bombers. Dornier Du-17s. Junkers Ju-88 Messerschmitt fighters by the dozen. This was the largest aerial armada ever assembled, stretching across airfields from Norway to Brittany, a force so overwhelming that even the sky seemed too small to contain it. Today would end the war. That was what Reichsmarshal Göring promised. 3 air fleets striking simultaneously from the north, east, and south, attacking with such ferocity that the RAF would shatter like glass beneath a hammer. By nightfall, Britain would have no choice but to surrender. Werner climbed into his Messerschmitt and tried to ignore the tremor in his hands. The channel crossing began smoothly, his squadron escorting a formation of 40 Heinkel bombers toward targets along the English coast. Werner flew at 6,000 meters, scanning the sky for the familiar silhouettes of Spitfires and Hurricanes. The radio crackled with routine chatter, position reports, course corrections, the mechanical language of pilots preparing for battle. Then the sky exploded. They came from above, diving out of the sun in a coordinated attack that split the German formation like an axe through wood. Spitfires and Hurricanes, not a handful but dozens pouring down from altitude with their guns blazing. Werner heard the screams on the radio before he understood what was happening. Pilots calling for help, calling their squadron leaders, calling for God. A Heinkel bomber ahead of Werner's position erupted in flames, its wings shearing away as cannon shells tore through the fuel tanks. The aircraft rolled slowly, almost gracefully, and then plunged toward the channel, trailing fire and smoke like a wounded comet. Werner saw no parachutes. "Brake! Brake!" he shouted into his radio, throwing his Messerschmitt into a hard turn as tracer fire streaked past his canopy. A Spitfire flashed across his vision, so close he could see the pilot's face, young, focused, utterly calm. Then it was gone, climbing back toward the clouds to attack again. The battle became chaos. Werner fought for survival, his instincts taking over where conscious thought failed. He twisted and rolled, dove and climbed, fired whenever a British aircraft crossed his gun sight. He watched one of his own pilots, young Hans Muller, who had asked about drinking beer in London, take a burst of machine gun fire through his cockpit. The Messerschmitt spiraled away, and Hans was gone forever, his dreams of victory scattered across the English sky. The northern attack from Norway fared even worse. Luftwaffe had expected to catch Britain by surprise, striking airfields in northern England while the RAF concentrated in the south. Instead, Spitfires from 13 Group were waiting for them, guided by radar that tracked the German formation from the moment it left the Norwegian coast. The bombers flew without fighter escort. Norway was beyond the range of German fighters, and the RAF tore them apart. 50 aircraft destroyed in a single engagement, the greatest single-day loss the Luftwaffe had ever suffered. Werner did not learn these details until later. In the moment, he knew only that the sky had become a slaughterhouse, that aircraft were falling everywhere he looked, that the careful plans and confident projections had dissolved into fire and screaming metal He shot down 2 Hurricanes during the battle, adding to his kill count with mechanical precision. But each victory felt hollow, meaningless, purchased with the lives of men he would never replace. The bombers he was supposed to protect scattered across southern England, many turning back without reaching their targets, their formations shattered beyond recovery. When Werner finally crossed the Channel and landed at Wissant, the sun was setting over France, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded him of blood and fire. He sat in his cockpit for a long time, unable to move, unable to speak, listening to the silence that had replaced the thunder of engines. The reports came in throughout the evening. Over 75 German aircraft destroyed, dozens more damaged beyond repair. Pilots who had eaten breakfast that morning would never eat again. The RAF had lost fewer than 30 aircraft, and many of those pilots had survived to fight another day. Werner walked past the empty dispersal areas where aircraft used to stand. He counted the gaps in the line, each one representing a man who would not return. The mess hall that night was quiet, the laughter and boasting of previous weeks replaced by the hollow silence of men who had glimpsed their own mortality. August 15th, 1940. The day the Luftwaffe had promised to break the RAF forever. Instead, it was the day Werner Kessler finally understood that Germany might actually lose this war. The letter arrived on a September morning when the mist hung low over the French coast, and the war felt older than the men fighting it. Werner Kessler recognized Friedrich Brandt's handwriting immediately. The careful, slanted script of a man who had once flown with precision and now struggled to hold a pen with his remaining hand. "I watch my children play in the garden," Friedrich wrote, "and I wonder what we were fighting for, Werner. The Führer's glory? Germany's future? Or just our own pride? Our need to believe we were special, chosen, invincible? I have no answers. I have only questions and the silence where my right arm used to be." Werner read the letter 3 times, folding and unfolding the paper until the creases began to tear. He had no answers either. The certainties that had carried him through Poland and France had crumbled over the skies of England, replaced by something harder and more honest. The RAF had not broken. Britain had not surrendered. And every day brought new losses, new empty chairs, new names added to the lists of the dead. The Luftwaffe still flew, still attacked, still sent its bombers across the Channel to drop their payloads on English cities and airfields. But the arrogance was gone. Werner saw it in the faces of the replacement pilots who arrived each week. Boys who had heard the stories of Black Thursday, who knew that the war over England was not the easy victory they had been promised. They flew their missions without the laughter and boasting that had once filled the briefing tents. They flew like men who understood they might not return, but on his last combat mission over England. Werner led a small escort formation protecting a group of Dornier bombers targeting an RAF airfield near the Thames estuary. The sky was gray and heavy, the clouds pressing down like a weight that made breathing difficult. Radar had tracked them from the moment they crossed the coast. Werner knew this now, accepted it as simply another fact of this brutal war, and the RAF was waiting as the formation approached its target. Werner spotted a lone Spitfire climbing toward them from below. Just one aircraft, a single pilot challenging an entire German squadron. The man must have known the odds. He must have understood that his chances of survival were nearly zero. But he attacked anyway, his guns blazing, his engines screaming at full power, his aircraft a small, defiant speck against the vast gray sky that Werner's wingman intercepted the Spitfire before it could reach the bombers. A short burst of cannon fire, and the British aircraft shuddered, smoke pouring from its engine. The Spitfire rolled once, then began its final descent toward the channel below. Werner watched for a parachute, hoping to see the white silk bloom against the gray clouds, but none appeared. The aircraft struck the water and disappeared beneath the waves, leaving nothing but a brief circle of foam that the sea erased within seconds. Who was that pilot? Werner von Dutt. What had driven him to attack alone, knowing he would die? Was it duty? Desperation? Or something deeper, something that Werner had never fully understood? A love for homeland so powerful that death seemed a reasonable price to pay. The bombers completed their run and turned back toward France. Werner flew in silence, his thoughts heavy with the weight of everything he had witnessed since July. The Polish pilots who had fought with outdated aircraft and impossible courage. The French pilots who had died, defending a nation that had already surrendered. And now the British pilots, those amateurs who had somehow refused to break, refused to surrender, refused to accept the defeat that should have been inevitable. Friedrich had been right all along. Courage had no nationality. Skill could be learned. And the greatest enemy any soldier faced was not the man across the battlefield. It was his own blindness, his refusal to see the truth until the truth destroyed him that in late September, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The invasion of Britain would not happen in 1940, perhaps would never happen at all. The RAF had held. The island nation had survived. And the war that was supposed to end by autumn stretched instead toward an uncertain future of years and death and suffering beyond anything Werner could imagine that on his final evening in France. Werner walked to the edge of the cliffs overlooking the channel. The sun was setting, turning the water from gray to gold to black. Somewhere across that narrow stretch of sea, RAF pilots were climbing into their cockpits, preparing for another night of patrol. They were exhausted. They were outnumbered. They had lost friends and brothers and lovers. And they had not given up. Werner raised his hand in a slow salute, not to his enemies, but to the men who had taught him what it truly meant to fight. The men who had shown him that victory was not guaranteed by numbers or equipment or training, but by the willingness to defend something worth dying for. Then he turned away, walked back to his aircraft, and prepared for the long war that lay ahead. The sky remembered everything, and so would he.